Hi, welcome to Leaving the Lies and Speaking Your Truth. We would ask that you like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Facebook page. It does help to support what we're doing and our cause, which is to help people that are leaving and transitioning out of cults and trying to recover from that trauma. We have a special guest here with us today. Her name is Karen McMillan. Karen is an amazing woman who is a hospice nurse and also does grief counseling and used to do grief counseling for infant loss. Karen's story is one of holding strong to her core beliefs and rising above and beating the odds. Karen has a sister who is still actually in the House of Yahweh, and we actually interviewed Karen's brother just last month. Gary was her brother, and Karen has been gracious enough to trust us with her story and allowing her to share her truth with us today. Autumn, thank you so much for joining us. You look amazing. Your hair looks great today. I love your hair like that. I really do, actually.
Thank you.
I'm not used to seeing it straight, but it really does look amazing. And Karen, you look amazing as well. Karen was in pigtails the other day. That I loved that too. I did like that look.
Yes.
Karen, thank you so much for joining us.
Not a problem.
I would just like to say that Karen is my Malin and I am her Weezer. That's how long we've known each other.
Yes, I am.
All right, honey, are you ready to get this started and let your truth be known to the world?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, can you tell us the story of when and how you joined the House of Yahweh?
I was a senior in high school, and my dad had come in and he had a booklet in his hand, and I do not remember which one, but he had asked me what the name of the creator was, or if I knew what the name of the creator was. And I had been to church my whole life. My mom always used to take my brother and sister and I, and sometimes I would go with my aunt. And I remember one specific time being with my Aunt Wilma and her church singing something along the lines of, his name is Yahweh. And my aunt and I had a nice long talk about that. So, I sprouted that out to my dad. And he immediately went running to my mom. Oh, Karen knows it. Karen knows it. Karen knows the name. Karen knows the name. And, I'm like, you know how girls are when they're a senior in the high school. They're like, what in? So push comes to shove, and my dad decides we're going to spend spring break, which was not during any of the feasts, but we were going to spend my senior spring break in Abilene, Texas, and kind of get to know these people. And I'm like, all my friends are going to Edisto Island, Myrtle Beach. Some are going to Daytona Beach. And I'm going to Abilene, Texas. Excellent. So needless to say, I had an attitude.
Yeah.
But my first trip out there, like I said, this was in between feasts. So I had met the oldest daughter of the overseer, and we became quick friends. She was engaged to be married at that time, and I remember them just showing me around town like normal teenagers. I don't remember, honestly, I don't even remember going to a Sabbath service while we were there. We went bowling, and we did normal teenage stuff, boys and girls mixed, and we just had a great time. And we got back, and, Dad was trying to get me to go to Passover. Well, Passover was during my senior prom. I had a high school sweetheart. We'd been together a couple of years. I wasn't going to miss my senior prom, and my sister at that time really didn't want to go either. So one of my very best friends, that was a guy, asked her to the prom, even though she was the freshman. So I got my sister out of it. true, which sometimes makes me feel bad, but so my sister and I actually stayed home when my mom, dad, and brother went to that first Passover, and we went to my senior prom. So that was.
You were exerting your independence even at that point, weren't you, Karen?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I was. My dad. After everything was said and done, and he calls me his alpha female, or used to call me his alpha female, because when I was young, he always raised me to believe I could do anything I wanted to do, and never to let a man tell me I couldn't do something because I wasn't a man.
Right.
Which was so different once we entered the House of Yahweh as compared to what he was.
I was literally just thinking, that's a great race to raise your daughter, but he kind of screwed up from the word jump on that one.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, that came back to bite him in the butt, but it worked out good for you in the end.
Yes. Yes.
So I think she kind of answered my next question, Autumn. So do you want to skip ahead?
Sure.
Okay.
Karen, were you expected to get married as a young woman in the House of Yahweh? And how did that play out for you?
Let's just say my parents had sent me to different places to meet different suitable bachelors in the House of Yahweh. Actually, my first feast, Pentecost of '89, was when Israel's daughter was getting married. And they had set me up with the man who later became Israel's second hand. Think you know him pretty well there, Autumn.
Hold on. I gotta fill everybody in on the joke, if that's okay, Karen.
Yes.
My absolutely wonderful ex-husband, Yedidia, was Karen's boyfriend. I wish you would have kept him, Karen. I wish you would have kept him.
That's okay.
Well, Autumn, in hindsight, that might have only made you a second or third wife. I'm just going to say. Then you and Karen could have been sister wives, which might not have been so bad, I guess.
I don't know. We might have just kicked him out of the room, and Autumn and I would have been together all the time.
I think our life would have been much easier.
Amen.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
But yes, my parents did try to get me away from my high school sweetheart. They sent me to Wisconsin at one point to meet another gentleman. That gentleman used to send me flowers to my dorm room, because at that time I was in college at the University of South Carolina. And I can remember a brief session where my high school sweetheart and I had broken up. And this gentleman had 49 white roses sent to my house. 7 times 7, the number of perfection. And I can remember I was over at my best friend's house from high school, and they didn't open the card, believe it or not. They wondered if it was from my high school sweetheart. They prayed it was not from my high school sweetheart. And when I got there, they were from him. And that scared the dickens out of me, needless to say. And so...
Sounds a little bit like the House of Yahweh dating game.
Kind of, sort of, yeah. Especially back then, because like I said, we were allowed... we went in tents together, boys and girls. As long as the zipper was open, it was okay. We all hung out together. I mean, we would go... Now, granted, it was more like you had chaperones when you went into the overseer's daughter and her husband. So, when you were in there, you could close the door because there was a married couple kind of as a chaperone.
Right.
But, it was... We all hung out together.
Yeah, it was a lot more normal or close to the secular world. It wasn't as cult-like, for a lack of a better word.
No, exactly. And we were all just normal teenagers doing essentially normal stuff, except for, I do remember we were allowed to drink because as long as you didn't take it to excess, it wasn't a sin.
Right.
So therefore, I can remember having wine coolers and a beer and, we would all just hang out.
Mm. Yes.
So how did you
Mel?
ultimately meet the man you ended up marrying in the House of Yahweh?
I met him in the secular world. I was in EMT school at the time, and I was working at a movie theater. And the one of the girls I worked with there was like, "Why don't you come over after work? I've got a bunch of Marines coming over to the house," And at the time, I was 18 years old, and pretty much, as long as I let my parents know where I was going and I wasn't home too late, I could do more or less what I needed to do. I was, a good kid.
Right.
And so I went over, and it was a couple of weeks later. We did, partied and stuff that the House of Yahweh probably wouldn't approve of.
Right.
Drinking excess, that kind of stuff. But I was 18. And so one night, he and I just kind of got talking, and he had noticed that I didn't come over from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. So you guys knew him. Kind of how dry his sense of humor could be, and how at times it could almost seem condescending, but he didn't mean it that way. It was just
for anybody watching, he was the typical United States Marine.
There you
Hoorah.
go. There you go.
Yes.
And so we kind of hit it off. And believe it or not, we kind of started playing games. Just, I told him about things, and we played guess my middle name. Stupid things you all do. And, when we played the guess your middle name, I said, "Well, what does it start with?" And he says an O. And so at first I gave his first name, because in the South, a lot of men go by their middle name. And Autumn, you can testify to that. My own son-in-law, his middle name is what he goes by. It's just a thing. And he was like, "No, dumbass, that is my first name." And he showed me his driver's license and held out the other one. So then the second guess was Otto. And, honestly, in the entire time we were married and the entire time I knew him, I don't think I'd ever seen his jaw drop that far down to the ground. He was like, "How in the did you guess that?" And I said, "Well, that's my dad and grandpa's legal first name." And so from that point, we kind of hit it off, and we started talking about the Sabbath, and we started talking about feast grounds. And he told me, that he believed that the mark of the beast was ceasing to work on the Sabbath and knowing the true laws of Yahweh. Well, he didn't say Yahweh, but the true laws.
Right.
And, as an 18-year-old girl who's just starting to become indoctrinated, to hear someone else say these things, because at the time, that's what the mark of the beast was. The knowledge, that was the mark on your head, and the hands were ceasing to work on the Sabbath. And I think my chin hit the ground. So
it was destiny.
Yeah, something, yeah.
Yes. Wow.
So then the next Sabbath that he had off from work duty, he had actually come over, and that was kind of the beginning of it.
And when did you ultimately end up marrying him?
Pentecost of 91, we were the first wedding in the new sanctuary out at 44.
Now, people are probably asking, okay, if he was a Marine, how did he keep the Sabbath and the feast? Do you want to explain that just a little bit, Karen?
Actually, he did get in a lot of trouble. He got knocked down from Lance Corporal to PFC. He didn't have to go to the brig, but they were threatening him to go to the brig. So he got in a lot of trouble in that aspect. He ultimately decided to do conscientious objector status. And so at that point, that's more filing of stuff. You have to get letters that prove you're not just being a turd trying to get out of the Marine Corps, that these are your actual beliefs. Israel wrote letters. My dad wrote letters. I wrote a letter. His best friend from Mississippi wrote a letter. You know, so they had letters coming in from everywhere. And eventually, he was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps. And
so that was how he worked around that. Yes, that's complicated. That's complicated, and I think that's highly unlikely for them to do that in the military too. I think you have to have a lot of clout behind you to do that.
Well, when we were talking yesterday, I couldn't remember for fact and sure, so I kept my mouth. But I did get confirmation. He actually even had my dad write a letter.
Yeah.
Because my dad was military. I had no idea that Daddy was even, a part of it. This was actually a pretty big thing from my understanding and a couple of questions that I asked.
So
right. I don't know who all wrote. I just knew, yes, it was a big thing. And Israel got behind anybody and everybody to help make it happen, as did my dad, seeking people who, not just friends, people that
your dad had been in the military too, Karen.
Correct.
Right.
Yes. Your dad was a Marine.
Navy.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they're brothers.
He and my ex used to go back and forth about that. Marine Corps or Navy shower,
Yes.
So you got married in 1991, Karen. I know that the multiple marriage and slavery laws started coming out in 1993, and the headship teaching started coming out at that time too. Can you share a little bit about how that affected or how that changed your marriage?
Well, initially with the multiple marriage, it didn't change our relationship too much. He wasn't interested in that, and the only thing he was interested in was making sure we appeared compliant, so at least that we weren't rebelling it. But then when the whole slavery and headship thing came out, that's more, I like to say, that's more when the former Marine came out in him. That's more when, no, we'll do things my way. It's, you're filling our child with at that time I only had one. I did end up getting pregnant with my second child. And at that time I had wanted to go to nursing school. I had been an EMT and I wanted to go to nursing school. We lived in a rough area of town. He was the only one working. Money was very, 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 very tight, especially on third tithe years. And I just, and in a way, yes, I was selfish in that I'd always wanted to be a nurse. So in that way, yes, okay.
I don't call that selfish, Karen. I call that following your dream, and lots of people do that, and that's not considered a bad thing.
Yeah. I mean, now I don't, but back then when I was still feeling...
Right. When you were still indoctrinated, basically, that's the way you were viewing it, because that's the way you'd been conditioned to think of it.
Okay. I'll accept that answer.
Okay.
So, it ultimately came down to he told me I was filling our children with demons by allowing other people, secular people in the world, to watch them. My dad would watch them sometimes, and other people that I had known for years and years. We're not just talking about dropping them off at the corner where nobody knows, No,
Right. You weren't
they
leaving
were-
them with strangers.
Right. No, they were in-home childcare with people I knew well, people who knew not to feed them pork, not to, people who I loved and trusted.
And were people who were respecting your beliefs.
Correct.
Right.
100%. But then eventually I got a letter that said if I didn't submit and whatnot, that I was going to be excommunicated.
Wow.
So I found a based on your income housing, and I moved out. I took my 2 children and I left.
Now hold on, Karen, before we get into this.
Okay.
Pause that thought. Because, man, Mel, how do they do this? Man?
I don't know.
They ask questions beforehand?
Yeah, that may be.
I mean, I tell you what. Hold
Yeah.
that thought
Well,
on that.
and the only reason we're having you hold, Karen, is because we're trying to keep it a little bit your story in chronological order, because there's another way in which the multiple marriage teaching affected you and your family, but not your direct family, your extended family.
Okay.
So,
But I do want to say, though, that I would like for you to tell us the 2 things that Mel and I know, and that's about your daughter and your son and the plate and the Stanley Steamer carpet cleaner.
okay. Yes, I
Which
think
one do
these
you
are
want?
pertinent. Yeah.
Whichever one.
Well, chronologically, we'll go with the Stanley Steamer carpet cleaner. It was coming up on Passover, and we were koshering our house, getting rid of all leavening in our home before we went to feast. And I had swept and mopped and vacuumed and everything. And like I said before, he was the only one working. And even though we lived in, not a very good area of town, and overall our rent was cheap, things were still very, very tight. There were times I'd only have $20 for an entire month of groceries for the 3 of us. And during that particular year, he decided to take the $20 that we had and get a Stanley steamer to make sure we got rid of any microscopical traces of leavening in our home.
And for anybody who doesn't know, let me just explain real quick to our listeners. Anybody who doesn't know or understand the reasoning behind that is because what the House of Yahweh taught is that the cleaning of your house and getting all leavening out of your house was representative of removing sin from your life. There was a lot of symbolism with that procedure that we participated in when we were there. Okay, sorry, Karen, just continue on with your story. I thought that was important to explain that.
Definitely, yeah. And, I can remember just being in tears thinking, how are we going to feed ourselves and our child for the next, week before we leave for feasts? Because at that time you could use your 3rd tithes from the moment you left for the feasts. Now
Right.
I understand all that's changed, but back then you could, from the second you loaded your car to go to the feast until you got back home.
Yep.
But that didn't help when I'm trying to think of how I'm going to feed my baby and the 2 of us for, the next week before we leave. So it was, not good.
That would create some tension for sure.
And when you brought this up to him, his response was?
Simply that we had to do everything in our power. My dad actually got involved and did a sermon on it. essentially that, Yahweh knows when we're trying to do our best. And, he kind of essentially scolded him, essentially saying, don't take your last $20 if you guys have worked your butts off. Because I had gone to my dad just simply saying, I'm not going to be some dirty little doormat. I have a child now. Right. And, ironically, he entitled that sermon, Be the Dirtiest Doormat. But yet he still fussed, and made it in no uncertain terms that using the last $20 in your bank account was not a righteous head thing to do.
Now, this is somewhat irrelevant, but I am curious. Karen, was this a sermon he gave to the whole congregation, or was this just a sermon he gave to you guys where you were living at the time with your small core group?
Just in South Carolina.
Okay.
With the families from North Carolina and the families from Georgia.
Okay. I was actually just wondering because I was like, did I hear that sermon? And obviously I wouldn't have heard it then, so. Okay, so now the story with the plate and the cup with your kids.
Oh my goodness, yes. That was one of the things.
And the reason why I'm having you tell this is because we're setting you up.
Okay. We were having it was not a Sabbath dinner. It was just a casual family night dinner. Daniel was probably 2, so Tabitha would have been about 5. And we had TV trays. We were sitting on the floor and on the couches. It was a very informal night. I don't even remember. We were watching some Disney movie or whatever on TV. But when the kids got done, Tabitha being 5, she took her stuff out and put it in the sink. And then my ex had instructed her that she needed to clean up Daniel's as well. And it was the way he spoke that really set me off, because I was like, no, she does not need to clean up after him because he has a penis and she doesn't. Sorry if I can't say the P word.
Oh, that's
but that's how it hit me. Now, I do not know if that's how he meant it, because honestly, we never talked about it. It caused 9 kinds of non-submissive wife issues.
Right. And part of this is, Karen, is because I'm sure that this for you was a trigger because you knew where the House of Yahweh was starting to go with some of their headship teachings, and you were essentially trying to protect your children from these cult-like stereotypes. Is that really what you were? I'm assuming that's why it triggered you.
Yes, that's exactly why it triggered me, because like I said earlier, my dad taught me prior to the House of Yahweh, no one will make me feel less than because I was a woman.
Right.
And no one was going to make my daughter feel less than because she was a girl.
Right.
And no one was going to make my son think that he was more than because he was a boy.
Right.
That was, it wasn't just the female thing. It was also the male thing.
Right.
Yeah.
My son was not going to get this big head and think just because he had an X and a Y chromosome that he was all that in a bag of grits.
Right.
Southern expression. And, so that's where that came.
You were trying to prevent your son from believing he had entitlement and prevent your daughter from thinking that she needed to be somebody's slave.
Exactly.
I think that's pretty good parenting in my opinion.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Mel, she's answered my question. You want to go into yours now?
Yes. So Karen, we know that your dad at one point took on a second wife. What was your reaction when that happened, and how did that come about?
Honestly, in the beginning, I don't quite remember how that came about. It had something to do with meeting her mother. I don't Whether I blocked it out, I don't really know. Her mother did become one of Israel's wives or concubines or whatever. But the girl had kind of stayed with us, and she was younger than my little brother. So to be quite honest, when it first started, I kind of thought they were kind of grooming, if you will, her to be my brother's wife.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And for anybody
Like
who
I-
hasn't watched, go back and watch Gary Stone's interview, because you'll find out more about that story there.
Stuff that, because I was married, I mean, I knew it was going on, but it not firsthand like he explains it.
Right, because you weren't living at home at this time. You had your own family and you lived with your family.
Even though it was right around the corner, I
Right.
still was not involved with all the day-to-day
Right.
stuff of that.
No, you were dealing with your own day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so he or they, I don't exactly know, had actually moved this young girl into, I believe it was my old bedroom, to be honest.
Wow.
And started kind of prepping her, lo and behold, to become my dad's second wife.
Wow. Hey, Karen, how did this situation affect you, your mother, and your brother?
It was very unbelievable. It was, there weren't words that we could talk about. Because, you know, my mother is she's a strong alpha female is what she is. And it was hard for her. And, you know, I can remember she and I being alone. And, you know, I'd seen my mom cry when I was younger over certain things, but not like this. Not the sheer, I can't even think of the right word at the moment.
It's a grieving type of crying, Karen. I've seen it.
Right.
I saw it in my mother-in-law when I was in the House of Yahweh, and it is a totally different type of emotion that you don't see often. It's very unique, and it's very hard to witness, because you do feel like you need to try to do something to stop it, and you can't. You're powerless.
Right. Exactly.
So what was your reaction? Did you say anything to your dad? Did you just have private conversations with your mom, or did you ever confront your dad about that situation?
Oh, no, I never confronted my dad about it. My ex and I, Orland and I, talked about it a lot. And I mean, it even bothered him. It bothered my ex big time. Just because, quite honestly, the age thing. I mean, we're looking at a girl who is 6 months younger than his youngest child. How in the hell is that supposed to make the family feel?
Right.
You know, it brought up a lot of anger. It brought up a lot of just, quite honestly, disgust. Because not at the girl.
Right.
She was 15. She was looking for a father figure. She wanted a stable life.
Right.
Right.
You didn't blame her.
Right. No. Honestly. And then
that's pretty big of you, and because, Karen, the thing is that it's hard to see it in that perspective, but obviously in hindsight we can look back and think, how would any 15-year-old girl be in that situation? I don't think any 15-year-old girl would know how to handle themselves in a situation such as that.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So I'm going to ask the next question, but we are down to about 3 minutes here, so I'm not going to have you answer it, but I am going to set you up and get you ready for answering this question. So at this point, I mean, you did end up getting divorced. We're going to fast forward a little bit here in your life. We're going to switch gears. So where did your marriage ultimately end up going? And how did you manage to move forward with your life at that point? And so we're going to talk about how and when you left the House of Yahweh and how that affected your life and changed your life from there. We're going to do that when we come back with part 2. We'll be right back.